This will be a summary review of the artistic components for group. Just as with the individuals, the artistic component is built on one principle. 10 points are built on one principle. That rhythmic gymnastics is defined by a unique composition built around a specific choice of music. This specific music choice guides all the other choices of the movements. The difficulties, the dance steps, the apparatus elements, and all the components of the composition are created in harmonious relationship with one another, all going back to the choice of music. Our first component, character. As we already covered in individual, and as we fully developed in STS, the movements have a clearly defined style, emphasizing the gymnast's unique interpretation of the character of the music. That style or character of movement is developed from the beginning to the end of the exercise. Character of movement meaning qualities that are distinctive movements that are different than others based on the choice of music. Let's look at an example where we have stylized steps and an exit from a body difficulty with a distinctive style of movement. Right away at the beginning of the exercise, we can see a style of movement, and we understand it right away in relation to the music. Even before the difficulties, distinctive movements that match the character of the music. In a group exercise for 2.5 minutes, there are so many possibilities for expressing character. We already covered in individual that the theme or the style of the movements of the body segments, arms, legs, feet, hips, head, all of those segments can be used to create distinct character of movement. In group, the organizational structure of the difficulty can be connected to the character of the music. The structure of the collaboration, the structure of the exchange, of transitions, of connections. There's endless possibilities with 5 gymnasts for creating movements that have a character, especially with the different types of collective work. Canon, contrast, choral, all of those structures of work can be used to emphasize the character. Types of apparatus handling in a specific relationship with the music. We spoke about that also in the summary of individuals, also in STS individuals. The movement of the apparatus linking to specific moments in the music is part of the idea, the character. Types of rotational elements with specific relationship with the music. STS has many examples, and we can refer back to those well-developed examples of different styles of music with distinctive movements. So I refer you back to that because it's so extensively developed with the intent of looking at different types of music and the movements having distinctive styles to go along with that music. Before and after elements, in the structure of the difficulties or the style of the difficulties, in the collective work, we just mentioned that, in the dance steps combinations, all in relationship to the music. Movements without any particular quality that is distinctive lack character. And it's important, as we emphasize with the individual summary review, and we emphasize again, that the dance steps combinations, which are required to express character in relationship to the rhythm, the accents, are a different component. So when you're evaluating character, you're looking at the rest of the exercise besides the dance steps. Again, no penalty is applied when the artistic component is entirely prioritized and fully realized throughout the entire composition. That means from the beginning to the end, and in the middle, and everywhere in between. So we looked at the same principle in the individual component. There would be no penalty for character when movement, style of movement, is present from the beginning to the end in these different places. Not every single place, not every single time, but a variety of ways to use the preparations to structure the transitions between difficulties inside the collaborations with body waves. Again, connecting steps under the throws, during the flight, during the catches, during rotational elements, changing levels, connecting apparatus elements. All of those are opportunities, and there's so many of those in 2 minutes and 30 seconds. All of these places are opportunities to have some character. So a variety of using these throughout the exercise, beginning, middle, and end, that is fully prioritizing character. And we have the same system of penalties as we spoke about in individuals when the majority of the exercise emphasizes the character in most of the connections and only missing in some of the difficulty elements. The penalty is 0-3. That is different than before. It is a stronger penalty. 0-5 when parts of the exercise have a character of movement. Some of the connections, some of the difficulties. Some versus majority. Of course, 0 penalty would be all. And 1 point in character is if you see character in the dance steps. So there's a theme of movement in the dance steps. It's recognizable for 8 seconds, 2 times, but it's only recognizable there. And the rest of the exercise is elements. Now, we've spent a lot of time in the educational materials trying to make a difference between character and rhythm, marking the accents of the music, throwing on an accent, stretching up the arms on an accent, stretching the arm without any distinctive style of the movement, not a pose, not a specific arm movement, just a stretch. Catching on the accent, walking or running on the accents. This is good work with the rhythm. This is the expectation. There's another component for rhythm. But that kind of marking the rhythm is not considered character unless the movements have a distinctive style. We'll look at one example, which is included in the broader STS presentation, where we can see really well-connected movements with the rhythm, but that lack in this segment, this is just a piece of an exercise, some distinctive style. If we compare to the first example we looked at the opening of the character component in this summary review. There were one or two movements by the one gymnast here in the front left corner, one or two movements, and then one time the feet movement beyond just marking the accent. But one or two movements, as we speak about in these presentations, is not enough to be parts. Of course, again, this is just a piece, but we can see that there's a lot of throws and catches, which is where the code of points had taken us at the end of the last cycle and had become somewhat of the norm. And this code of points is a reaction to that, to require and allow for more development of the theme of movements. So not just throwing and catching on accents, extending the arms throughout the exercise, but developing movements that really link up to the choice of music, or emphasizing the accents in ways that are distinctive or different if you choose one music versus another. Dance steps combinations, which we just referred to, these dance step combinations are the highlight, they're a spotlight, they're dedicated exclusively to character and rhythm, and two are required. As you've probably read now many times in the code and also in the STS presentations, the central focus of the dance steps is character in the movement. Dance steps are not just 8 seconds of movements that mark the rhythm, because those steps could be placed anywhere with any music. Not just marking the rhythm for 8 seconds, but having some character, some distinctive movement. Here we see two modalities for sure, and a distinctive style of movement connected to this choice of music. There's a minimum of 8 seconds, the apparatus is in motion. By contrast, less than 8 seconds, a high throw, a pre-acrobatic element, or less than 8 seconds in duration and or with less than 8 seconds of character due to the timing of D elements which interrupt the character. would invalidate the steps. Less than 2 modalities of traveling. And for contrast's sake, we include this example here, which is more of marking the rhythm, but not really developing for 8 seconds a distinctive character. Again, these movements very well mark the accents, but don't have any truly distinctive character emphasized for 8 seconds. And in the previous slide, when we mention that if difficulties interrupt the steps by breaking the character, the steps would not be valid. The question now with this code is about CC elements being performed in the dance steps. They can be, but the body segments, the apparatus work during the CC have to support the character of movement and be coordinated with the accents. Otherwise, the dance steps will not have the requirements, 8 seconds of character with the rhythm, and will not be valid. And you are well versed in all of the norms and expectations for dance steps to be valid. As with individual, there is a requirement to have 2 dance steps combinations, and the penalties are 0.5 if one is missing and 1 point if both are missing, or 2 are missing, because some exercises might have more. So missing 2 dance steps is a 1 point penalty. Body expression. The same standards as covered in individual. Beauty linked with power, linked with strength, linked with elegance. Some gymnasts, some groups emphasize one more than the other. The concept of all of these being linked is that these are the expressive qualities of our sport rhythmic gymnastics. Regardless of the physical size or height of the gymnasts, movements of the body segments are performed with maximum range, breadth, and extension. Here's a great example. And when we watch this, we are going to see the way in which the power and intensity of the movements match that of the music. Again, the code talks about the gymnast having an expressive, energetic connection to the music. You can see that here by the intensity of even the connecting movements. Arm movements. Even running steps, leg movements. Every movement of the body is performed with maximum power and intensity. This is the collective expressivity of the gymnasts, emphasizing the accents, intensity of the character of the movements, energetic connection. Again, maximum power, energy, and intensity with the segments in the movements, big and small, no penalty. And we covered this also in individual, and mentioning here one great way to think about it, which was part of a technical committee discussion on this topic, was that the penalties can be thought of sometimes in the sense of the music itself being more intense or more powerful than the movements. And the penalty of 0-3 means underdeveloped in the exercise, partial participation of body segments, or an imbalance in the intensity and the energy amongst all 5. So some are more intense and expressive, others maybe not. Sometimes the coach puts that less expressive or powerful gymnast in the back. But this means they have some expressive connection to the music, but not in all the parts. And for a penalty of 0-5, it's not developed, so there's insufficient participation or in intensity and the energy in all 5. It doesn't mean there's 0, but it definitely means for this penalty, when it's not developed, that the music is more powerful than the movements. And what that would be, whatever the choice of music is. Our next component, creating contrast or dynamic changes, so important in groups, because a lack of contrast can create monotony. And because the group routine is 2.5 minutes, there are so many opportunities to create contrast. Contrast creates the visual intrigue. And the new requirements request that a minimum of 1 dynamic change is created by all 5 gymnasts together, and then the remaining required 2 dynamic changes can be created by 1 to 5 gymnasts depending on the music and the choreography, as long as this moment of contrast can be visually recognized by the judge. So, as a refresher, we're going to look for contrast when the tempo of the music changes, when the intensity changes. We watch for those contrasts in the body movements and the choice of apparatus movements. This is powerful music. And powerful, strong movements. And now we see this transition. And the tempo changes with apparatus and body. And here again a contrast, a return to powerful movements. Those are dynamic changes, contrasts. Sometimes short pauses can be used to create dynamic changes. That's when the pause is used to shift the tempo or the intensity or even the character. And we'll look here at an example where we can see a dynamic change when 3 create contrast and they go more slowly than the other 2. And then later, the end of the clip, where all 5 shift and the tempo of the movements change with the change in the tempo of the music. We'll watch the middle 3. in contrast to the speed of the other tempo of the other two. And now they're all at the same tempo and intensity. And now we'll watch the shift here. So they were all building in intensity. They all joined up at the same tempo, building, 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 powerful, strong, intense, and then shift all five together into slower movements with their arms and body because the music shifted. So two types of dynamic changes, one with all five and one where we had contrast, which is also a requirement in collective work. Contrast and three going more slowly and creating, it's like creating a double contrast, but creating a double dynamic change. So three are required. 3 dynamic changes out of 2.5 minutes are required. If only 2 are performed, the penalty is 0.3. If 1 is performed, the penalty is 0.5. If none are performed, 1 point. Again, these are stronger, bigger penalties to really encourage coaches to work on this component because it has such an impact on the composition and it's so visually engaging and interesting and distinctive. It makes the exercises distinctive. We spoke also in individual about body and apparatus effects. This is going beyond simply working with the accents. That's an expectation. This is a specific element with a specific accent or a specific moment in the music that the apparatus or bodies are highlighting that moment in the music, or the music itself highlights the apparatus or body element. It's bringing the specific music and the specific element, whatever it is, together as a highlight. At 7.1 in the Code of Points, there's many possible ways suggested for creating effects. And of course, these are only options. It's not limited to those. And of course, judges are referred to the STS fully developed presentation. But we know that both simple and complex movements can create an effect if they're performed with a specific piece of part in the music. We can see a few here. This is a more, quote, simple throw, but the way it's performed where they come together and then all throw on the hugely powerful accent creates an effect. And the STS presentation goes into textual descriptions to help the judge understand the idea of the effect. In this case, this apparatus effect is supposed to be emphasizing the musical crescendo. This is a very unique apparatus element, and to highlight this unique element, the coach has chosen to place it on a large accent to draw attention to. And by contrast, in the previous example, the actual throws themselves are not necessarily original or unique throws, but the moment of the music and the way that the gymnasts come together and then explode with the peak of the music is the original connection there. So it's possible to create those in all different ways. It's about the union. Similar concepts here where the intensity builds up a little bit, they come together, they're moving and swirling, and the hoops come together, and then in a big accent, all hoops come up together, emphasizing this moment in the music and bringing attention to it. This is an important thing to remember. So sometimes the interesting elements are performed in harmony with the rhythm, but without a particular relationship to a specific accent. So that's good with the rhythm, but they're not considered effects if they have no specific relation to the music or an accent. And I think we'll look at one of those a little bit further down the line. They're also in the presentation, where there's an interesting rebound or catch, but the accent, there's no specific really accent. And therefore, it's a great element. It's possibly with the rhythm, but it's not considered for effect. Here again, we return to more examples of effect, where we do have an effect, sort of highlighting specific places in the music with the movement. We had the ticking, emphasized by the fouette, and then the exploding accent coming out of that with the arm. And we kept this example also from the STS in this summary review because of how important the organization, the collective work is to every component in group. It's related to the character, which we spoke about. It's also can be related to effect, and here we see an example with sort of specific accents in the music, highlighted by the structural choice of canon, which echoes what we hear in the music, plus the unique nature of the actual element. So that's all the things we talk about with effect. Certain piece of the music, a certain way of doing it, and it's one of the unique elements. There's an effect based around canon. And again, we lifted this example because these are the more sophisticated ways that we can use all the aspects of the code. So different trajectories and directions of apparatus elements. So sometimes coaches will organize the throws with different heights, different trajectories, different planes, and again, everything always seems to link back to contrast. That contrast can be used, if it's done with specific places in the music, to create an effect. And this one you will remember from STS, where the one hoop flies at a certain plane and matches the crescendoing swirl of the music. Zooming. So again, the way that was structured is that all the hoops are flying at a high level, and then the one hoop in a different plane zooms over the top of all the gymnasts. That was intentional. All of that was intentional. All of these elements unified, the certain accents are intentional. The coach had an idea, the choreographer had an idea to create the one hoop at a certain plane while all the others are up on that specific piece of music on a very long diagonal, because on the diagonal you can get the farthest distance, so then you can really emphasize the zoom. And now we come to certain interesting apparatus elements that don't have a clear connection to a specific accent. Now this is a great element, this roll and then the catch, and it's on the catch is on an accent, but this roll is not on some specific part of the music. So this is good with the rhythm for sure, but this isn't an effect. The gymnast who rebounded it off her leg, which is super hard and difficult and definitely unique and stands out, but it wasn't on a specific accent. So it wasn't created as an intentional effect, despite the fact that it's already impressive as an element. In terms of a specific union, this element was not created that way. Now the contrast of the bodies afterwards have a intentional impact for sure. Yep. You can see it again here when she rebounds it. Not a specific accent. All right, and now we'll look at an example of a strategic pause, since we looked at all different types of effects. And we know that a pause, because we spoke about it earlier in the component of dynamic change, that a pause can be used to signal a change from a fast to slow tempo, slow to fast, changing the intensity. It can also be used as an effect when the pause is created just as a pause, where everyone stops and the going from motion, motion, motion to full stop, and then resuming at the same speed or intensity, so there is no dynamic change, then you have an effect. The music is building, building, building. They're all moving, moving, moving. It's intense, it's powerful, and then it's a pause. And then it continues the same tempo. So this is an effect. Basically drawing the attention to the stop in the music. Stop in the music, stop in all the action. So the requirement is to have 2 effects. 2 times out of 2.5 minutes where the specific element and specific moment in the music are clearly and intentionally connected to each other. If there's only one, the penalty is 0.3. If there's none, the penalty is 0.5. Collective work. So collective work really has been emphasized way more in this new code of points because, again, like dynamic changes, like effects, the collective work is totally unique to group, and the collective work, like those other components, makes the compositions different from one another because of the specific choice of music creates unlimited possibilities for arranging the gymnast's work to create some sort of idea, some character, some effect. That's what makes each individual group exercise unique, interesting, engaging, exciting, different. And now the requirement is that one of each type is present in the artistic components, because now this is all emphasized on dance steps and connections. And as we mentioned earlier, we sort of moved away from deliberate transitions and connections in group in the same way we put so much emphasis on difficulties. So now the judge, following the coach, has to spend a lot more attention and time and focus on the connections in group. And inside those connections, or inside the dance steps, that's where we can see the collective work. Of course, the difficulty should be organized with contrast, with canon. It's also, it can be an effect. It's interesting. It's visually diverse. But this requirement is asking for this, for one of each collective work structures to be present in the artistic components. Synchronization, this one we all know. Simultaneous execution of the same movement, same amplitude, speed, dynamism, etc. All together, doing the exact same thing, in the same way, at the same time. And that's an example of synchronization in the dance steps. That was an example of synchronized movements after the body difficulty, in connection before the next difficulty. Choral. Now, choral is the perhaps the least developed of these structures of collective work over the past 2 cycles. Choral can be thought of as the opposite of synchronization, which we just looked at. The opposite. So if in synchronization, the 5 gymnasts are performing the same movements at the same time, same tempo, in the same way, choral is deliberately different movements performed by all 5 gymnasts in a clear structure, so that it can be recognized. Different traveling, body, or apparatus movements by all 5, or in subgroups, can be in subgroups 2, 2, and 1. And this is different than a transition between formations to set up a difficulty. and this is probably the most challenging part for everybody, is to, as judges, all of us train our eyes to recognize when they naturally have to all move differently to set up the collaboration, which is not a deliberate choral structure, it's just a setup for a difficulty, versus choreographed moment where different things are happening. And there's always an idea when it's done that way. It's always connected to the idea when the 5 gymnasts or the subgroups are doing different movements. It's a contrast to synchronization or whatever. It's either related to the music, the idea, all of it, the character. This has become one of the more iconic examples of the last cycle, and probably because it's so identifiable. All 5 are doing different movements. This is choreography. This is specifically choreographed different movements. And then you can see they start to come together and they're going to move and synchronize. So maybe that's part of the idea. They all start and they're doing their own thing and then they come together. We've added a bonus example here. Same thing. We're going to look at how are the 5 gymnasts moving differently. Another truly visible example here, and of course this is related to the idea or the character as well. Why? This is an homage to Madonna's music video, Vogue, where they're doing the same thing. And now let's look at this example and see if we can see the difference between this, which is a preparation, and the previous 2 choreographed examples. That was an example with movement into a setup in order to throw. And now we've done synchronization and choral, and we arrive at contrast. She's down, they're up. The 3 in the back are different than the 2 in the front. 2 different structures of contrast within the dance step. So different levels can be different speed. We saw that earlier with dynamic changes, when some are slow, some are fast, or intensity, force softly, or direction or movement. And canon. We saw this example earlier. Rapid succession or canon, 5 gymnasts, can't be 4, it's got to be 5. The movement begins immediately after or during the same movement by the previous gymnast or the previous subgroup. It's more readily identifiable. I'm sure all of you know it, but we'll watch it again just to see the canon, the rapid succession. Here it is. So the penalty is 0-3 for each type of missing. They need synchronization, canon, contrast, and choral. So if 2 components are missing, it's 3 plus 3. It's 0, 6. Formations, and we really saw the formations get so close together in the end of the last cycle, which is why there is this penalty for amplitude, placement of the different areas of the floor, corners, diagonals, lines, but really seeing the movement, because group is so visual, seeing the movement from wide to closed, circles, lines, directions, versus kind of standing more closely to just throw, toss, throw, exchange, transfer, for the purposes of doing as much as possible. Formations which lack variety will be penalized, which is really an imbalance between wide and closed formations, or when the same formation is maintained in the same place for more than 2 difficulties in a row. That's 0, 3. And we really saw both of those emerge in the last cycle. This penalty is taken one time, so it's either the imbalance, the same formation, both, but it's 0, 3 once. And unity. Unity we covered also, with some emphasis in the summary presentation for individuals. Again, this is several technical faults, one or several technical faults which break the composition by requiring the gymnast or gymnasts to halt the performance. It means the fault is significant enough, severe enough, that it requires them to break the performance to recover. It's one time at the end. And now, I'm sure all of you figured it out when you watched an STS, but this is the same group in 2 different competitions with a loss. One is severe and one is minor. So one is a unity penalty and one is not. The gymnast lost her ball. She recovered immediately and could continue in her pose for the element. It was not severe, so she didn't have to stop performing, so there's no unity penalty. As a reminder, this also would have no impact on the character of the exercise. That is not evaluated in that mode. Perhaps rhythm, if she lost rhythm for 1 count to recover it. It is not a connection penalty, it's not impacting the character, and it doesn't impact the unity. The only thing it could impact is rhythm. Now the one gymnast did have to stop performing because she couldn't, for a moment she was confused what she should do. She had to stop, so the penalty would be 0-3 for unity. Also, there would be an impact on the rhythm, but even this would not impact the character. It has nothing to do with whether those movements have a distinctive style or not. That had to do with losing rhythm and losing the unity of the composition. Connections. This is really one of the components for group that is much more emphasized in this code of points. And this is an important section for not just the exam or the retest, but really for the evaluation and for the coaches, all of it, because it has to be evaluated as consistently as possible for the coaches to spend time focusing on it. We really didn't have very much attention to it in the previous code. There was a one-time penalty. But what happened is we saw all these collaborations and just standing up, sitting down, running, sitting down, turning, stand up, down, the same as an individual, which really moves away from an idea or a unified concept or even character. We remember connections must be intentional, logical, smooth. Those are the ways the difficulties are linked. Here we will see a series of difficulties. And we're going to look at the way the difficulties are linked. Here is a connection. Here they're in a new formation already. And then they start to change the formation again. And it's all keeping the character. They're moving from one to the next for a reason. By contrast, we're going to watch the girl who's going to move from here to the back. She's sort of going to run or walk, and then she's going to wait. And this became quite common. She's running back around the people. She's going to wait, now she's going to walk and wait for them. So again, this arrangement is she doesn't have a clear purpose. She's just waiting for her next role, her next task, her next job. That waiting, that walking and waiting is an illogical connection. 0, 1 each time. Now we'll look at the gymnast who's waiting to catch the club and then runs and slides to lie down because she's going to become an obstacle. So that's an illogical connection because she's standing up waiting and then she runs to lie down without choreographic relevance. 0, 1 each time. And we reviewed this in the individual and we review it again. A technical fault is not a connection penalty. A loss of apparatus is not an illogical connection. The consequence could be, but it's potentially only impacting the rhythm because the connection is about the link, the choreographic link between elements. So a technical fault should be thought of only in its impact on the rhythm and, of course, which we've talked about, the unity, but not the connection, unless the consequence of this fault means a recovered apparatus and then an illogical connection to reposition or restart the movement. This is the same example we saw before. She's going to move the apparatus in the middle. We've already said this is not a unity penalty, nor was it an illogical connection. It was just a loss of apparatus. So you probably lost the rhythm for 1 count, 0, 1. Illogical connections. Movements of the group and the apparatus must correlate with the accents. Even the choice of pre-acrobatic element with the leg tap, like cabriole in the cartwheel, emphasizes the accent. This is very close correlation, accent and movements, body and apparatus. Rhythm penalties are taken when the movements are separate or disconnected from the tempo. That happens when the gymnast is off, they're late, the throw is late, the catch is late, meaning after the accent or before. Or there's a clear accent and the gymnast or the group, all the members just pass through it. They don't mark it. Or a technical fault interrupts the rhythm. And this penalty goes up to 2 points. There are several additional penalties that are reviewable in the Code of Points for body constructions. Contact with the apparatus. This is important because the gymnast cannot be longer than 4 seconds without. And we'll watch here the gymnast who runs to the back corner. How long is she without the apparatus? Zero, 3, 1 time, regardless of the number of occurrences, because it is compositional fault. And now, as an individual, we return to the beginning of our chapter on artistry, the opening concept that artistic excellence is achieved when the structure and the performance are fully developed. And they fully develop these components: character, expressivity, contrast, strategic placement of elements, connections, variety. That's when we achieve a story, an idea. And now we'll do 2 new practices, hoping that we again think about this system, these components, how we look at them, regardless of the team, regardless of the nation. And let's do a practice here and see how we fare.
My love is swing. If your body feels my heartbeat, if your soul burns like a fire, come on, still let me see you swing. If it seems to you too crazy, I'll be laughing at you, babe. Come on, still let me see you swing. La 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 la. Tonight the orchestra's burning out the floor. I wanna swing it just a little more. I see a baby walking out the door. Come on and move it to the ballroom floor. You need to move and shake it to the core. I got the feeling that you're waiting for. To get all jiggy and ready for more. Get on the track and hit the ballroom floor. Reach out to me. It's got to be. Soon you will see. Come on, go with me. Don't miss the swing
We hope that it really stands out that in essentially every single element in this exercise, there is some character of movement. And that the elements are very smoothly and logically connected. That when the gymnast is transitioning, there's character of movement, or there's a reason. They're collaborating, they're interacting. For this choice of music, their expressivity with their faces and their bodies match it. So let's check where we end up. We had missing canon or rapid succession and choral. 2 to 3 connections and about 4 in rhythm. 1 or 2 tenths for the loss of the apparatus. And for this, places where you might want to consider. It's midway through, there's one collaboration where the gymnast catches the ball. She does do a head turn, but she sort of abruptly is up, catches it, stands up, and then kind of backs up to get ready for the next throw. That connection had minimal to no sort of choreographic relevance, even with the head turn, which was, it means the coach thought about it, which obviously the coach thought about everything here. And then before the fouette, one of the gymnasts kind of was up, down, turning, and starting. Obviously, the majority of these elements are all extremely well connected. In terms of effect, the effects registered here, one was the kind of distinctive moment in the music where the knots are tied in the rope, and visibly, which is of course very intentional by the coach because she has to make a knot, so she's doing it in a way that's intentional with the music. And it's a specific place in the music to do it, like a and another effect when the two gymnasts sort of rotate over each other on the big dynamic change, crescendo, big accents, this impact of the girls rotating over each other on this accent. And let's try one more. All right, let's check. Actually, an interesting exercise, because this exercise actually worked with a lot of the components, but because of some of the technical errors, had an impact on the artistic components. So the 1 dance steps was registered towards the end of the exercise. They do have expressivity. They do work with segments, just not fully. They do have dynamic changes and effects. Missing is choral. We did penalize for the formations are predominantly on the closer side. There is an imbalance between widening out. There's a unity penalty here for the loss. Obviously, the gymnast who had to run out had to stop performing, and they all had to stop performing waiting for her. So 1 times 0.3. This exercise was a good example for looking at connections, because there was some walking, there's one visible running to the position, some waiting to get into positions, pausing, and a loss of rhythm due to the technical, predominantly the technical, because the exercise is choreographed nicely with the accents. But because of some technical mistakes where they get off and they lose it, then they start to lose the rhythm. There's also a penalty for more than 4 seconds without apparatus for the gymnast who's lifted. She is without apparatus for more than 4. So, hopefully this summary review has been helpful and useful, especially reminding all of the judges that this code of points became a very collaborative effort where the world asked the technical committee for more attention to these components, which means the penalties are greater. And as we saw in these 2 examples, when the components are really well thought through and executed, the compositions are great. And in even this second example, the composition was thought through, and we can see the impact on of these technical errors on this particular composition, and we can see the difference in the connections between the 2. We can see the difference in character of movement, even though there is some in the second. We can also see how an exercise that has a lot of rhythm penalties and connection penalties still has effects and dynamic changes. Each component has to be evaluated in its own merit. Thank you, and good luck to everybody.